But what is often called advocacy for free enterprise, what is often called advocacy for the free market on the part of the Republicans, when carefully examined, is in fact opposition to a small handful of programs that are favored by the Democrats, while simultaneously favoring a tremendous amount of pro-corporate privilege in the form of corporate welfare, in the form of pork giveaways. I came from Alabama, so Senator Shelby is one of the Republicans that I've had to deal with in my time. In the form of government-granted monopolies, and sort of systematically stripping away a certain set of programs, programs that are intended to, allegedly intended to intervene on behalf of the poor, although I think they actually fail at that, while keeping in place the much larger structure of what Benjamin Tucker identified as the four great monopolies: the money monopoly, which is government control over the monetary supply, cartelization of banking; the land monopoly, which is government control over the allocation of land through processes of, at the time it was mainly land grants, now it's also things like eminent domain and urban renewal and all these other things that, you know, pro-growth Republicans are just as happy to engage in oftentimes as Democrats. The tariff monopoly in the form of protective tariffs, and the intellectual property monopoly, patents and copyrights, each of which you saw as privilege for large corporate interests. And I think rightly saw them as such. And I think that these are things that persist and that are typically actively being promoted by most Republicans who declare themselves as being sort of primarily pro-growth, pro-business, while trying to pass this off as advocacy for free enterprise. Now, what's sort of the upshot of this? What's all the point of this? How does it connect with what I'm saying about the left? If you identify yourself as being of the left, if you identify yourself using terms which seem on the surface paradoxical, but which actually lead into a conversation about a deeper truth. So if I go around saying, for example, I'm a free market anti-capitalist, which I'm perfectly happy to say, you know, I could come up with other terms. Like I could say, I am for real free enterprise. You know, I'm not for the kind of stuff that you see around with this growth machine, and I could go on and on about, you know, like what they're saying about free enterprise versus what I think real free enterprise is. Now, the reaction that I'll typically get from that, I mean, I've tried this sort of thing before, and the reaction I'll typically get from that attempt to pop my views in a short way, and then expand outwards as necessary, is that it actually gets kind of a reaction. Or if not just then simply, you know, believing that, like, I want exactly what we have, except even more hypertrophic, you know, even more of sort of the corporate status quo. If I use a term like free market anti-capitalist, what that gets is admittedly confusion to start out with. You get what? Why? But because you get what? Why? That opens the opportunity for a conversation. It opens an opportunity for a conversation at the specific point of, look, there's a difference between advocacy of free markets and defense of actually existing big businesses. There's a difference between what free enterprise would produce and what you actually see in this heavily status-controlled market. And from there, because you're engaging with a confusion that was already there, but that they did not yet realize was there, you're able to begin having a conversation that actually clarifies the issues and draws out the issues.
What you just described as a situation where you have a situation where you have capitalism, and I think it's really just diverting from what capitalism is. I don't know why you're adding definitions like free market anti-capitalist, because the capitalist is not the problem. Capitalism's great, free enterprise is great, free markets are great, they all mean the same thing. You're concerned of subsidies and government giveaways and all this type of stuff to corporations, as am I, but it doesn't necessitate a changing of the definition. And I find such a value in society of clarity that by creating terms, and you might feel that you're creating conversations, I think what you're doing is you're creating a necessary confusion with people that I think it does a disservice to bringing people into your view, because how do you bring people into your view if they don't have a clue what it is you stand for?
Well, but so I apologize if I haven't managed to make my view clear to you. I find that my experience is that I don't have that much trouble making my view clear in general. as for the question whether I'm sort of engaging in unnecessary confusion or whether I'm redefining terms, again, what I'd recur to is that I don't think that the definitions of these terms as they're commonly used is all that simple. So let me ask you a simple question.
Sure.
And you know, this is non-rhetorical, so I'm just curious about what your experience has been. Have you found it in your conversations necessary for you to clarify what you mean when you talk about defending capitalism is something like laissez-faire capitalism, for example?
I think generally people assume I mean laissez-faire capitalism when I say capitalism.
Okay.
So, and you can say that there's a spectrum of capitalism where you have one end is laissez-faire and one end is where you have some government intervention on the way, just like you know, you have democratic socialists in Europe. Now they may not want total state ownership of everything, but certainly they, on a spectrum, they're more capitalist than they're socialist. And I would consider myself a capitalist, and I would consider many people in our government presently now capitalist. But on a spectrum, they might be not as pure